Welcome back to the Board CEO Partnership Series on the Nonprofit CEO Spark podcast. I'm Marcia Beckner, founder of Culture Cares Global, and in this series, we're walking through the CARES framework to help boards and CEOs, executive directors, build stronger partnerships that ultimately create healthier nonprofit organizations. The last episode, we talked about commitment and appreciation, two key levers to building a successful partnership together. And it begins with a shared commitment to the mission and shared accountability towards each other and a true appreciation for one another's expertise. Today, we're talking about the R in CARES, respect. But maybe not in the way that you think. I'm going to put a little spin on it for you. Most people define respect as being polite, listening to one another, or treating people professionally. And those things certainly matter. But in my expertise, this deepest form of respect between a board and CEO is something much more practical. Respect is demonstrated through role clarity. It's knowing where board governance ends and CEO management begins, and having enough trust to let each one do the job they've been hired or elected to do. Let me share a cautionary tale which happens all over our sector. A few years ago, I began coaching an amazing executive director who had stepped into a really challenging organization, and that's why she called me. She had been in this role for about 3 months. She was super smart and experienced and thoughtful, and the board had been really excited to hire her because they believed her skills could transform the organization into its next chapter of growth and expansion. But there was one problem no one had anticipated. Many staff members had long-standing personal relationships with the board members because they had worked together for years before this new executive director was hired. So when someone on the staff became frustrated, instead of talking with their immediate supervisor or instead of bringing concerns directly to the executive director, they called a board member. Sometimes they complained about their workload in a certain season. Sometimes they complained about the culture. Sometimes they simply said that they didn't like a decision the executive director had made. And now here's where things became extremely difficult. The board members cared deeply about the organization and they wanted to help, so they listened and they asked questions and they empathized. Sometimes those conversations lasted an hour. Sometimes they happened repeatedly, but they rarely included this executive director. And the board wasn't intentionally trying to undermine her. They thought they were just gathering information. The problem is that they were hearing only one side of the story. And once you've heard one emotional version of events, it's very difficult not to begin forming assumptions. And meanwhile, the ED had no idea these conversations were happening behind her back. Instead of leading her staff, she found herself managing rumors, assumptions, and concerns that had already traveled through several board members before they ever reached her. Imagine trying to lead a team or an organization under those circumstances. Every difficult staffing decision became political. Every performance conversation risked becoming a board discussion. Instead of employees looking to their leader to help them, they began looking around her. The chain of leadership quietly disappeared. And within about a year, that executive director resigned. It's no surprise, right? And it's not because she lacked leadership skills or couldn't manage people, but really it was because the board had unintentionally made it impossible for her to lead. And sadly, this isn't an isolated story. I see different versions of this in various organizations. So my message to you is this. One of the greatest responsibilities of a governing board is hiring an exceptional CEO or executive director. But here's the question I want boards to consider. If you've trusted someone enough to hire them, do you trust them enough to lead and manage the organization? They are two very different things. Governance is not management. The board governs. The CEO manages the organization and the people within it. That distinction can sound obvious until emotions enter the picture. A board member receives a phone call, a staff member says they're unhappy, someone shares a concern after a committee meeting, a volunteer has an opinion, suddenly the board feels pressure to solve the problem. But here's the reality. When board members begin coaching staff and investigating personnel issues and giving direction to employees or becoming the emotional sounding board for staff frustrations, they weaken the authority of the very leader you've hired, even when everyone has good intentions. Now, let me add one important caveat to this, because of course there are exceptions. So I'll state the obvious because I really want to. If there are allegations of harassment, discrimination, fraud, abuse, unethical behavior, of course, the board has the authority and the responsibility to investigate. Those situations are different and they're very rare. So what I'm talking about today isn't rare. It's staff overreaching around the CEO or executive director to the board and the board wanting to be empathetic and caring and do what they can to help without really bringing in the person who needs to come in, which is the executive director, and giving that authority to the executive director to lead a culture that is working for everyone. One of the healthiest practices I've seen is creating a very clear escalation pathway. Everyone knows where concerns go. Employees speak with their supervisor first. If needed, they move to their executive director. The executive director involves the board when governance oversight is appropriate. And this creates consistency and fairness and accountability where it belongs. It also protects employees because concerns are handled through an established process rather than through informal channels. Here's a practical exercise I'd encourage every board and CEO to complete together. Draw 3 columns on a whiteboard. The first one says board responsibilities. The second one says CEO or executive director responsibilities. And the third column says shared responsibilities. And then begin listing the actual decisions your organization makes. Who hires and evaluates the CEO? The board. Who hires and manages the staff? The CEO. Who approves the annual budget? The board. Who helps develop the budget? The CEO and leadership team. Who responds when an employee disagrees with a workplace decision? The CEO, executive director. Who monitors the organization's culture? I would say both, but in different ways. You'll probably discover several areas where expectations aren't exactly aligned with you and the board while you're going through this exercise. And that's good. That's really good because it's better to discover this in a retreat or a meeting session rather than during a crisis. And I want to leave you with one of my favorite quotes from Brené Brown. Clarity is kindness. The clearer your roles become, the more trust can grow. The more trust grows, the less people feel the need to overstep. And that's what respect really looks like. It's not about control or distance or silence. Respect is trusting one another to stay in your lane while fully supporting each other in the mission. In the next episode, we'll talk about the E in CARES, which is engagement, and why attending every board meeting doesn't necessarily mean your board is truly engaged. Thanks so much for listening, and remember to go to the show notes and download the companion guide that comes with this series of episodes. Utilize it for your training onboarding, annual board strategy session, and really make sure that you are intentionally creating a culture that is healthy, inclusive, and empowering for all. I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for listening to today's episode of Nonprofit CEO Spark. If you're ready to turn burnout into boundaries and build a healthy, happy culture where everyone, including you, can thrive, visit culturecares.com to learn how I support nonprofit organizations like yours. If this episode brought you value, share it with a fellow leader navigating stress and overwhelm. And remember, you are meant for great things, and you don't have to burn out to prove it. Until next time, keep leading with courage and confidence.